Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Kane McGladrey from Hyperproof. Kane, thanks for being here, man.
Chris, it's so nice to be on the show. I'm glad that you were on our show, and now I'm on your show. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was joking offline, like you're a real pro at this. I went on your guys' show and I felt like I was on, with like a radio host or something. You're so smooth. The way you were kind of doing things on the fly and just handling all the questions and commentary and ideas I was throwing out there. So I know today's going to be a fun one. But for folks that aren't familiar with you or Hyperproof, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the team?
Sure. So I am the CISO in residence at Hyperproof. I'm a second-time CISO who is a senior IEEE member. I'm the #1 thought leader on risk and cybersecurity, according to Thinkers 360. And I've been in the cybersecurity industry for over 25 years. And the reason that I joined Hyperproof is kind of during the pandemic years, I was doing executive advisory with a lot of Fortune 500, Global 1000 businesses, and they all wanted to know, are we cybering hard enough, guys? And typically it was the board wanted to know that the CISO was not sandbagging the budget, or the CISO thought that the board thought that they were sandbagging the budget. It always comes back to that. And what we found with the team I was working with prior to Hyperproof was that it was very hard to empirically measure control efficacy and reduction of risk. And because as a CISO, when I was a CISO in the defense industrial base, it was super important to be able to show to our customers, to our suppliers, that we were effectively reducing the risks that we cared about and be able to have attestations like an ISO. And so when my friend Matt said, hey, look, we're looking at building a platform that'll help companies assess their risk, that will help companies adequately and automatically via APIs and automation to be able to effectively measure the reduction of risk and then to be able to effectively communicate that, I got super excited. And I've been here 3 years, still super excited today, especially with what we're doing on our intelligent adoption of artificial intelligence, as opposed to having it be just like the magic box that does everything. That's not what we think we want. We don't think anybody in GRC actually wants that. And who knows, maybe we'll get into AI a little bit in the show. It's you probably haven't heard of AI before, Chris. It's this new
No,
technology.
I've
New
never heard of it.
technology.
I have to check that out. No, I mean it's dominated the headlines everywhere we look, including in GRC in terms of the category of GRC, AppSec, vulnerability management, you name it. Everyone's looking to see how can we apply this technology. And personally, like I'm excited about that because I know the attackers are looking to use it. I know our business and development peers are looking to use it. We should be looking to use it. So no doubt we'll get into the AI. They'll be inevitable. We'll get to the AI topic in the discussion today. And then you also caught my attention with your background in the DIB. I've spent a lot of my career in the federal space, defense industrial base, and things like that. Still do a lot of work there now. And they love their legacy GRC platforms. I won't name any names, but the
Archer.
DoD, the DoD, the federal civilian agencies have these legacy monstrosities of GRC platforms that are god awful. No one likes them. They do not work. I don't even know if they have functional APIs. Like you use APIs and automation. Those don't even exist with these platforms. But nonetheless, you kind of led into this is like we're seeing a broad push, both in the GRC platform piece as well as just a broader GRC ecosystem. I feel like when it comes to looking to modernize, like you can call it GRC engineering. Some people use that phrase. Some people use GRC modernization or innovation, whatever you want to call it. Why are we seeing this push now, like in GRC? Because we have done things the way we do things for quite a long time, and now I feel like we're starting to finally see that, okay, we got to make some changes here. Why now?
I think it's a recognition that executives are coming to, that they want to know that they're getting value for spend and that they're actually getting material improvements for spend as opposed to the old trust me model. One of the things that I always was bothered before I got into the GRC space when I was doing consulting like you are, I always was bothered by this idea that they checked the password policy once a year. They checked their firewall configuration once a year. They checked the EDR, the antivirus, depending on the era, once a year. And the other 364 days, it's fine. It's fine. Nobody cares. And the only reason that they had to do it was that their policy said they were going to do this. And then you look at the speed of modern cyber threats and the agility of modern threat actors, whether they're criminal gangs or whether they are nation state actors seeking to conduct espionage, or sometimes both as a moonlighting gig. There really is a recognition that trust me no longer works, that you can't just say, hey, we bought this thing and it's probably fine and we don't need to look in on it. And then if you look at the cyber insurance industry, that's where we have these requirements from, I won't name any of the names, but one of the major ones has a list of 12 controls that you have to be able to demonstrate to them that, hey, you're cybering well enough to be able to apply for insurance. It's like those things, Chris, your kids are young, they probably like, you have to be this tall to ride the ride at the show, and they have to be able to make those attestations. The problem is, and this is chronic, the SecOps team never likes getting asked, hey, could you send me a screenshot of the firewall configuration, which is like a command line output in a shell? Like, can you screenshot an output out of Bash or Corn Shell or something like that? Like, nobody gets excited about that. And so they put it off. And if you think about their workflow, their goal at the end of the day is defend the company. If you're a blue teamer, that is what you're doing. You're trying to defend the assets that you're charged to protect. And that's your economic incentive too. I've seen people's bonus structures be associated with, hey, we didn't have any bad things happen this year. Everybody gets a bonus. The holidays are coming up. That's a nice thing that people can do. The GRC team, by comparison, has the financial incentive of they have to, as a second line of defense, go collect evidence that the SecOps team is doing their job. So we've already got a natural conflict there where the SecOps team thinks that the GRC team is a distraction. And the GRC team's incentives are, again, economically, you get your bonus if we get our attestations or if we get a reduction in our insurance rate or both or some combination of those. So we have these dueling financial incentives between people, and it's kind of redundant at this point because you can automate all of this stuff. You can automate almost all evidence collection. You can automate the ingestion and the testing of all of that. It doesn't need to be this manual process. And we've seen, for years, I've seen companies that, well, funny horror story I used to do auditing too. I found a company that had that exact conflict I described, SecOps team, GRC team, nobody's very happy. And they had brought us in, and there was this one control on their dashboard, always crushing it, every day, always, it's on, it's never failing. The other controls, well, some of them aren't so good. Can you take a look? And we took a look, and we found out two things. First of all, the person who had written their GRC, what we now call GRC engineering, but who basically written their tech stack for doing GRC, their bonus was based on that one control. Pretty much just straight up lying. Like, it didn't matter if the control was working or not, it was always in the green. And they didn't really care that much about some of their other teams, and infighting actually influenced some of it. And we went, cool, so now we know as an audit firm we can audit you twice. First time is for whatever you're being audited for, and second thing is if you say you've built your own nightmare fuel thing out of whatever horrible programming language you've been together, we'll check that too to make sure that there's actually no illegitimate entries in there, or unintentionally or intentionally misleading facts. And I think that's where we get to our current state of play in GRC, where there's that recognition that we have to be able to measure this stuff. We'd like to know we're getting value for money. We don't want to spend too much, and we sure don't want to be audited twice.
Yeah, you dropped so much in there that I'm going to get to, especially the incentive piece. I have that kind of built in stuff, but I want to ask you here in a moment. But you really framed it well. Like, I often joke that GRC is living in the dark ages for the most part. We've seen the rise of DevOps, DevSecOps, shift left, cloud APIs, automation, now AI, you name it, right? SaaS, and we're still doing spreadsheets, snapshots, screenshots, shoulder surfing, paper-based artifacts. It's just insane. And I'm glad we're starting to make a change, but it's been a long time coming, honestly, and it's really unfortunate it's taken this long. And you talked about measuring value and efficacy. Like, you guys have something you call the compliance maturity spectrum at Hyperproof, and I was digging into this. It's like a tool to help organizations self-assess, like, how are we doing in our compliance journey. I'd be curious to see like a high level overview of it. I know it approaches it from like the three-pillared perspective of, the people, process, technology paradigm that we all know. What does it look like at a high level? And then I'm going to dig into it a bit with you across those different areas too.
Sure. So the basic idea is that companies move from a reactive, event-driven, inconsistent state, and they move towards a mature, automation-driven, frequently dashboard-focused ability to communicate and how well they're doing with a cycle of continuous improvement. And there's multiple stages throughout that journey, of course, but it's that recognition that this is a core business process. This is not a project. This is not some little thing that's just somebody's pet project. This is actually a business process here, folks. And that you need to get better at it, at least in some elements, but it's really a choose your own adventure for which elements you want to get better at. A company that is in a highly regulated space is going to have more of an interest in some improvements than a company that is in a less regulated space. Or a startup, for example, in a tech-forward manufacturing might go, okay, cool, what's the minimum amount we can do to start? But then when they start saying, cool, we're going to do an IPO roadshow, how do we quickly level up our maturity? And then how do we effectively communicate that, but in such a way that it's sustainable, rather than the old project-based mentality that we frequently saw with technology or transformation projects, where they'd go, well, we'll just do it once. Good enough. We'll get the audit. We'll forget about next year entirely happening. So the intent behind the maturity assessment and the maturity model is to be able to help companies proactively move. And because we've done this a lot, well, everyone here at Hyperproof has done this before. We know what good looks like. And one of the things I saw when I was doing auditing was, candidly, what determined the success of a company's audit and their audit practice, or their GRC practice, wasn't how big the company was. It wasn't their revenue. It wasn't their, their technology stack. It was whoever was in charge, if they were a former auditor or if they were former, like, Big Four. Because if they were, they knew what good looked like, they knew what a horror show looked like, and they knew how to move towards what good looked like. And we said, cool, so why don't we just make all that learning available to everybody, so they don't have to trip over themselves in their enthusiasm to get better at GRC? And that's the intent between the maturity model and the assessment.
Yeah, one part I liked in there when I was digging into it is, you guys kind of frame it as, it depends how organizations view compliance. It says, is it merely a box to check, right? Are we just box checking, or is it something that plays a positive role in business growth? And I think I talked to you about this on your episode, your show, when I came on previously. It's like, I like that, because we always hear phrases like, compliance doesn't equal security and things of that nature. And security is often viewed as a cost center. But when it comes to compliance, that's what's, driving demand from customers to make a purchase, or business partners to engage you in some way. It's often what's driving revenue, for security vendors, right? Like, do we have, can we go out and tie our product to some security or compliance requirement that will help you meet? That will be more appealing to customers. And it's just kind of, it's almost like we're biting the hand that feeds us when we kind of dunk on compliance, because it's what's driving a lot of the behavior we do in security. If it wasn't, think about it, if you didn't have, NIST or CMMC or HIPAA or HITRUST or all these different frameworks, how much do you think organizations would truly invest in security if they weren't required to do it? Probably not as much as they do now. I like how you guys framed it like that. What do you think of that phrase, in terms of driving business growth? Because I'm starting to see more and more, a lot of security vendors are kind of clinging on to like compliance frameworks as, hey, we help you do X, Y, Z. We help you meet, this requirement and that requirement. And it's funny to see security kind of come full circle and start to appreciate compliance a little bit, knowing that it drives spending and behavior.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately it's not just the ability to say you NIST well, which is a complete fiction. I remember seeing SEC 10K disclosures last year saying, we do the NIST framework, not which one, just we do the NIST framework. Cool, guys, that's neat. Let me know how that goes for you in court. But if you've got an actual attestation, or if you've got an actual certification, or if you've got an actual real audit standard like PCI or HITRUST, or I don't know, ISO 27001, or its good friend ISO 42001, the new AI one, having that ability to get that often is a monumental amount of work for companies. And what I saw when I was, again, going back to the defense industrial base, our competitors didn't have those. Right? We were not in a software manufacturing. We certainly did some things involving software, both for commercial as well as for other entities, and as well as manufacturing and so on. But what we found was the ability to get an attestation or a certification was difficult, but the ability to reuse that evidence became paramount to make it more efficient, because you can't always go, cool, we're getting a new certification, here comes another year-long project and we're going to dedicate staff to it, especially if you've already got all the evidence already laying around, or in a format that's probably adequate and sufficient. And so some of what I'm starting to a lot of what I've been thinking about, and a lot of what we've been thinking about at Hyperproof here, is how do we make companies more adept at being able to use the evidence that they already have and the controls they're already operating to get additional certifications and attestations and proof, because that, first of all, signals trust to their insurance company. if they're getting cyber insurance. It signals trust to the market. It's not just like we all get wrapped around how great SOC 2 Type 2 is, for example. That's one part of selling a service. That's not the only thing. There are certainly other things that you can do that differentiate your service offering. But in order for that to be possible, and you've probably seen these, we do these things called control crosswalks, which are spreadsheet hell. It's like, let's figure out how NIST and PCI and ISO are all related to HIPAA. And you build it all in a spreadsheet and a pivot table. Everyone's miserable, and you go, yeah, that's terrible to build. So at Hyperproof, we just said, cool, let's just build that to begin with, because we don't want people to have to do that work, especially bespoke, because once you've figured it out, you don't have to do it again. And then if companies can take that and say, cool, well, we basically have a common controls framework, or we've got something similar to a common controls framework here. Here are all of our controls. Here's what the attestations they meet. What you can start doing now is you can start doing costing, and you can start doing revenue association. A good friend of mine at a company had a vice president walk into their office and say, look, why are we spending $1 million on these controls? We want to whack them. We don't see the business value. So they went back to their team. They spent about a week. They measured it all, and they came back to that vice president, said, cool, so do you like $1 billion? That's with a B on it, billion. Yeah, I like $1 billion. Why? Well, that's what that $1 million in controls is getting us, because that's our FedRAMP program. So shut up and get out of my office, right? And being able to authoritatively say, these controls are associated with this revenue at this cost, really drives that business value for executives who might not understand. And we should not by any means blame them or demonize them for not knowing. They come from an entirely different intellectual founding and background. But our ability, as whether we're security professionals or whether we are GRC professionals, to communicate that laterally and upward so that people understand here is the value of what we do, I think that's a real game changer for cybersecurity these days, because previously it was just this weird cost center where your best day was nothing bad happened. Right? Who wants to
Yeah.
work in that job anymore, right? No, if you help win business, if you help take down deals, that's what ends up getting rewarded. And that's what drives visibility for the value that cybersecurity and GRC professionals bring. We want to democratize that, and the GRC maturity assessment is a way of helping that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic that's so often, it's talked about in our industry, but we've never been very effective at it. As you point out, it's like, communicating the return on security investment, right? Like, what is the return on this? Why are we spending on these things? Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to get this compliance framework? If you can articulate that, tie it to business deals, tie it to revenue, tie it to entering new market segments or industry verticals, you name it. That's something that we've never been very, great at doing. And back to the maturity assessment, in there, you also talk about the ability to respond to regulatory changes, whether it's through organizational capacity or process maturity. Why is that important? And I feel like historically, you may say, well, regulations and compliance move slow. That was the case, in some cases, right? But when you look at AI, EU AI Act, you got DORA, you got NIS2, you got regulations out of New York, California, kind of a patchwork quilt kind of starting to materialize here in the United States. Like it's different than it was in the past, and you do have to be able to kind of adapt and move quickly on this front.
Yeah, and that's where we're seeing that move from being reactive and making it up as you go along and wanting to move towards a consistent documented process and eventually towards a self-improvement model. That really becomes necessary. The thing that I've found over the years is, you're right, companies thought regulation would move slow. That's no longer true, especially what's coming out of the EU and Brussels. And some of those new regs, honestly, they carry some fairly hefty penalties. And I think you probably remember when GDPR ruled out. Not everybody who's watching the show probably remembered when GDPR came out. For them, it's just some annoying cookie banner that keeps coming up on their web browser. That's all GDPR is. But when the EU first rolled GDPR, they were like, cool, we're going to make this as a profit center. We're going to make money. We are going to just figure out how do we turn this into enforcement actions that generate revenue. And if you are a large social media company, a multi-million-dollar fine, who cares, right? It's a rounding error on your balance sheet. It's not a big deal. But that was the way that they were able to monetize that regulation. I think we're going to see a similar behavior with the EU AI Act, especially in that case, where they're going to be looking at these model providers, especially Probably general purpose AI providers, I think, are going to be the biggest target. I think the high risk ones, the ones that are going to do like minorities report style policing to say we are the thought police and we can predict you're going to do crime. We'll just ignore what the UK said they were going to do in spite of that. I think we're going to see a lot of enforcement actions. I think we're going to see a lot of revenue generation out of the EU, and I don't think that's going to actually help with anybody wanting to do business there. It's a real interesting way of like, how do you disincentivize innovation in your market? But companies that aren't aware of these things, well, I could say for for a large social media company, $1 million fine, multi-million-dollar fine, billion-dollar fine, whatever fine, big deal, not a problem. For small companies, for innovative companies, for companies that are trying to do something meaningful, not having visibility of the regulation does not mean you're not like able to skip it. And I think that if companies haven't hit that regulatory escape velocity that those larger entities that are too big to fail have hit, then they're going to have a bad time. And so having that move from let's make it up as we go along, let's just figure it out, let's maybe write some stuff down, have it on a post-it note, kind of like we used to do security actually, moving towards a more proactive and moving towards a more outward facing, able to take those inputs and make changes proactively, I think that's going to be a better outcome for a lot of us.
Yeah, I agree with you there. You actually, I was laughing, in my mind as you were saying the aspects about the EU, kind of using compliance and regulation as a revenue driver, because it's kind of it's kind of a perverse incentive, a way to approach it, because it's going to have implications for innovation, economic prosperity, national security. It's going to limit and stifle access to technologies in some cases because you simply can't be in that market due to regulatory requirements. But nonetheless, as you said, whether you're a large, service provider, a model provider, or a small innovative startup, you're going to have to kind of thread that needle of meeting these requirements in the EU, but also in the US. We have this different approach where it seems to be, kind of test and try and experiment, and a bit of a deregulatory push right now. What are your thoughts on how businesses kind of navigate that dichotomy, where we have one hand where you want to be a regulatory superpower, very cumbersome, heavy-handed kind of regulations that people have to meet, and then the United States, where it's not quite that. I feel like you've probably heard this phrase in cyber and in compliance, where it's like the high water mark. I feel like people have to kind of build to the high water mark just because you have to meet that, right? And you can't have, it's not economically feasible for most to have like, multiple product lines, one for the EU, one for the US, one for the, like, it's hard to do that at scale. I'm just, how do you navigate that as an organization?
Well, it is possible to do. I have not seen it, but I know that Microsoft sells Azure on a DVD or a series of DVDs, where if you want to just install the entirety of Azure, you think the Exchange administrators have got a bad day, right? The on-premises Exchange, the on-premises Azure people, oh, wow, you forgot to patch your Azure today. And threat actors make a heyday out of it. That's not going to be fun as a job. And I think that's the challenge, is if you're Microsoft, you can probably create a bespoke product for a limited market and say, cool, you don't want to buy our cloud. Here, you can install it in your own data center. Funny story, I also know a gentleman in the Netherlands, which is famously below sea level, and they're looking at how do they build data centers again? Because that's what they need, because they can't buy anybody else's cloud because of laws, and they're having a bad time. I think the challenge for companies, though, is ultimately a business decision of, it's a trade-off. Like, what is the cost of building a bespoke product for a specific market compared with what is the cost of building to the high watermark, compared to, sorry to say it, what's the cost of FOMO? Right? Or the cost of YOLO, depending on how you want to look at it. And just, assume that you won't get caught, or that you will hit regulatory escape velocity, and that you will not worry about the fine, because by the time it gets imposed, you will have enough revenue to have made an exit. There isn't a right decision there, but that's the maths that are happening right now, where companies are saying, cool, so we've got like California. They are pushing very hard on the AI laws and regulations. We haven't seen those get neutered yet. If you look by comparison to what happened in Colorado, those were going to go hard. They were going to be big. They were going to be scary. They were going to be next year. Now it's like, well, maybe in June we'll look at it again, because they got lobbied into non-existence. And we've seen this pattern happen repeatedly, because you've done defense industrial based stuff before too. I remember when DFARS was coming out, which is the predecessor to the CMMC. And I was working with a couple primes in that space, so big brand companies that make interesting things and are primary contractors. And they had really a three-pronged approach. Prong one was in 6 weeks, they're going to be DFARS compliant. Prong two was they were going to have litigation to prevent the rollout. And prong three was they had lobbyists. Well, we know which one won. It was certainly not the first prong of like doing cyber harder. It was like, hey, can we get the lobbyists to just make this thing go away? I think we're going to see that domestically with a lot of these initiatives. And so then the wild card becomes, what do you do with the EU? Or what do you do with any other large developed market where you potentially want to sell your product? And that's where we may see bifurcation. Or we may see market exits entirely from saying, yeah, well, actually, we don't want to do anything with your market. It's too difficult or it's too expensive for us to enter unless you are one of the top tier vendors that can, slough off and laugh about a mild penalty that would, for most companies, just be an end to their company.
Yeah, it's funny you frame it that way because, actually, if you go Google right now and search or whatever your favorite search is, EU, looks to back off pressure on big tech or something like that. There's actually a headline this week where they're thinking about backing off of, deadlines and timelines and some of the aggressive requirements due to, kind of this growing voice of, hey, you're going to stifle innovation. You're going to blah, 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 whatever and now it's kind of a raging debate between that and people who are concerned about privacy and consumer protections. And so that's a whole other thing. You can go check it out. But I think you're right. Some may exit the market. Some may say, hey, we're just going to do a risk acceptance and pay the fine. To hell with it. Like we have enough revenue. It's whatever. This is going to be interesting to see. So we, going back to the maturity assessment a bit, and kind of broader conversation around GRC engineering, GRC modernization, whatever you want to call it. We started off talking about GRC platforms, and I know this is a topic that you guys are incredibly passionate about and building in. Like, how important are the GRC platforms? We talked about process maturity. We've talked about, organizational capacity, things like that. But there's also a technology piece to this. Like, when it comes to GRC platforms, I've worked with a lot of organizations that are using these legacy platforms that don't have APIs, can't ingest, automated evidence, collection, don't do machine readable artifacts, you name it. It's a nightmare. Like, like I'm curious from your guys' perspective, how do you kind of come into an environment and say, look, like you're not going to get where you want to go in terms of you modernizing your program without modernizing your tech stack here?
Well, I think actually the EU AI Act and similar regulations are a great tie-in to that, because if you think about it, if you are a business and you're trying to make a determination of what does it cost us to be in this market, if you have a verifiable single source of truth that says, here are all of my controls, here are the markets that we are required to operate those controls in, here are all of the revenue that is associated with that, here are all the risks associated with that. If you have that in a trustworthy source of data like Hyperproof, you're able to make that association of, it's a business decision. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's like, hey, if it costs us, if there's this much risk in the EU, you go, yeah, we'll just not sell them AI stuff anymore. Shrug. Big deal, right? It becomes a business determination, though, because what we have seen previously is where companies, they build these nightmare spreadsheets, or they try to use a legacy platform like Archer to do predictive analytics on what is it going to take us to enter a market. Inevitably, it doesn't go well, and it's because those platforms were certainly not built for that, and Excel, not the intended use case for it at all. And plus, people can just fudge numbers in Excel when they want. I think that it's important to have that real-time view into what are our controls, how can we repurpose them, what is our evidence that the controls actually exist and are working, because that gives us a lot of leverage in vendor negotiations, especially if you're a CISO or if you're in procurement and you want to go like extract free consulting or professional services out of a vendor whose controls are failing. But it also gives us that confidence that when you make a business decision to go into a new market, if you know how much your one of our customers actually is able to do this, they save $10,000 every time they enter a new market, because they know here are our controls, here are the regulatory requirements of this new market, whether it's a new vertical, whether it's a new geolocation, doesn't matter. They can figure out, here's how much time we just saved by not having an analyst and not paying a consultant to go figure that out for us, because they have that consolidated visibility. And that's the real value behind these platform solutions like Hyperproof, where we stand behind that. You don't have to go verify it yourself that somebody didn't cook the proverbial books in Excel, but we actually have proof that things are working. And that allows business leaders, maybe they don't get onto the dashboard, but they can trust the outcome. And when the CISO says, look, if we go into that market, we're going to need to add 6 staff, and we're going to need to add these 5 controls, and it's going to cost us $2 million. Well, cool. And we're going to get $100 million in revenue. Seems like pretty good ROI, as opposed to the CISO going, Well, I'm not sure. You don't want to say that. It doesn't, it's a bit of a career limiting move, but it also isn't the sort of thing that a business can make a decision on unless they're willing to work through the fog of war and go, we'll figure it out. It'll probably be fine. Because in some cases, it's not fine, right? And moving into highly regulated markets or moving into geographies with more spicy cybersecurity terrain, let's say, I think that that becomes harder for companies, and it's better to be able to look across over the horizon, which is what the GRC maturity model encourages, that proactive, outward-looking approach to see what's coming and to be able to predict it, rather than being reactive and going, oh, the business put us here. This sucks. What do we do? What do we do? How do we react to this? And during that time, you're losing money, you're losing market velocity if you're trying to go for attestations or certifications. And inevitably, the salespeople are saying, well, if we just get this FedRAMP thing signed, if we just get this ISO 27001 thing signed, we'll be able to get the deal on Tuesday. And it's Friday now. You can get that done in 2 days, right? We want to stop those conversations. We want to get ahead of those conversations so that businesses can effectively determine what is their needs that they need to get, how do they get them, and be able to communicate those outward to the rest of the market.
Yeah. Again, like the way you frame things, I just really love it. I've joked with people. We talked about, I think earlier in the conversation, you mentioned having kids. Like I have 5 young kids, and it's absurd in this, this area, we're in the era of zero trust, or, no trust, but verify, or trust, but verify, whatever you want to use it in those kind of phrases. But when it comes to compliance, we just take people's word. We do system sampling. We do manual screenshots. It's like, kind of checking my kid's room and once a month. Is the room clean? Yeah, it looks good. Sure, of course it's clean for the next 29 days. It's absurd. That's not how cybersecurity works. The systems are dynamic. They're always changing. Like you need that real-time visibility and visibility and governance of the environment to really know where you stand from a compliance or cybersecurity posture perspective.
And
So
we're really
got
seeing that in third-party risk as well, which is why we bought Expent, a new acquisition of Hyperproof, because we realized there are companies out there that want to buy services, not from your kid's room, at least I certainly hope not, but rather from other businesses. They want to be able to say, hey, they are cybering adequately. Let's send them a 551-page questionnaire. Cool. And then let's ask for their trust center. Cool. And then let's still have a phone call. And then let's have another phone call. Let's have some round of signature. It's crazy. Right? It is absolutely, and nobody, again, in SecOps, when you, because I'm on the advisory board of my local union, my local college, this is not on the curriculum of like, here's how to deal with a 551-page security questionnaire with multiple choice questions, and you can't say does not apply. Nobody gets excited about that. So we said, cool. So what can we do in the market that, again, will allow companies to proactively communicate the value that they bring, the trust that they should have in the market, without driving people through these insane loops that ultimately the SecOps team doesn't have time for. It's not defense in depth. It's not what they are getting comped on, but that's absolutely what businesses need in order to gain revenue. So the reason we went after Expent, and I'm happy to have them on the team, is that ability to proactively answer those security questionnaires and to proactively communicate the evidence that Hyperproof is collecting, to be able to show that out to trusted partners, to be able customers, to potential customers or vendors, and say, here's what we've got. Do you have to ask us questions? Because we'd rather you don't, because here are all of your facts. Would you like to interrogate this beforehand? And we're finding that that actually really makes it faster. And again, it comes down to showing the value of cybersecurity as a professional. Is you're able to say, well, cool, I helped work on these programs that generated this revenue. Your annual review pretty much writes itself at that point, right? If you can say, I worked on the controls that drove $5 million in revenue this quarter, it's better than saying, I worked on the firewall. Okay, what did that do precisely? You want to show me some vanity metrics there, bro? Like you blocked 5,000 attacks a second? What's that even mean? Nobody in business cares. We have to learn how to communicate that value in business terms, and that also helps cybersecurity professionals grow in their careers.
Yeah, again, it's coming full circle to the incentives and the behaviors. If you could tie this to the incentives of the business, it drives behaviors, and it, again, it could drive promotions and career advancement for you. You're speaking the language of the business. And, to your comment about the third party, risk management, that's an area that's so fundamentally broken. The questionnaires, the spreadsheets, it's just, and not only that, but we continue to see organizations get impacted, overwhelmingly from third party incidents and nth party incidents. There's just a lack of visibility there. It's so problematic. So this is really cool to hear, kind of applying these concepts, not to your own organization only, but also to your supply chain, your third parties, et cetera. So Kane, we've kind of run the gamut of everything from the EU to the US to AI, GRC engineering, modernization, you name it, the maturity assessment model and everything in between. Any parting words or things you want to throw out there, regarding you, Hyperproof, or anything else to the audience?
Three things maybe. So first thing for the GRC maturity assessment, we do have a self-assessment. I hope you can put that link in the show notes. Second thing, no, I said I had three. Well done. I've already forgotten the other two. GRC maturity assessment. The other thing you mentioned on third-party risk, I'll just go flatten it to two, as I have forgotten the third one. Something else I'm working on is Hyperproof every year puts out a benchmark study of what we're seeing in the market. We're currently in the data collection. I expect that I'll have something like that up in January or February of next year with my analysis of here's what we've seen. We've been doing this report for years. It's the first time that I'm really putting my thumb on it and able to look at it and say, cool, so we've had these third-party risk management. We've had this first-party risk management. What are the trends? What are the macro things that we're seeing? And I want to be able to share that out so folks can make better planning decisions for not just 2026, but also into the future, because we're seeing these persistent challenges. I think that that hopefully that report, the IT benchmark report from Hyperproof, will be able to help companies make that determination of how they can do GRC, how can they measure more effectively, combine that with the self-assessment, and they can go, cool, so here's a pathway to get better, here's what happens from getting better, and you can make a business justification for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely am going to put the link to the self-assessment in the show notes, but I'm kind of a bit of a free, obsessive person when it comes to the reporting. I love the reports. I'm always reading about them, writing the takeaways from the report. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that one in January as well. And again, thanks so much for jumping on and kind of diving into all things GRC. It's not often I find someone that's so excited and likes to geek out over GRC like I do. So thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Chris. Have a great day.
Anytime.